Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, guys. Today I'm going to be explaining to you Imam al-Juwayni's position on good and evil and God's will and the problem of evil. We're going to get into all of those kind of topics. So today we're going to be asking this question: is God good? What does it mean for God to be good? The atheists don't seem to be convinced by these arguments. They point us to the enormous all the evils in the world to show that, what do you mean God is good? Look at all the evil that exists. And a simple theodicy is simply, look at all the good that exists too. So we are left with a dilemma of understanding what we mean when we say that God is good. What do we really mean by this statement? So these are some of the topics we're going to be getting into. Imam al-Juwayni, who is an Ashari, he discussed some of this issue. He made a controversial statement where he basically said, whatever God does is good. Whatever aligns with God's will is good. This seems like a divine command theory thing, but it's deeper than that. So basically, everything is going to change now. The way we define good and evil is going to change, because God is the creator of all. That's under hardcore concept of Islam. For whatever it is that exists, God is the creator of it. So who creates? الذي خلق الموت والحياة. Is God that created it, right? God is the one that created everything. Allahu khaliqu kulli shay. Right? So whether someone is having good in his life or whether he's having difficulty in his life, it is God that creates all of it. Let me just complete that first verse that I read. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. Right? We know this, right? But even before that, we're going to discuss what does it mean for God to be good, and would anything change that? Can anything change God being good? Imam al-Juwayni, he gave a very strong statement that if God decides to punish the good or something like that, he will be justified in doing that. Like literally, God can decide to do whatever he wants with his creation. So that, let us sink in first. And this is what I mean by everything will change. Now we define what we mean by good. Take for instance a scenario, 3 scenarios, okay? The first scenario, God creates all of his creation in Jannah. Is this a possibility for God to create all his creation in Jannah? So they will be enjoying life, they will be in pleasure, in bliss for eternity, all of his creation. Then you have a second scenario where God condemns or damns all of them into hellfire. So God created them in Jannah, all of them. That's one possibility. And the second possibility, God puts all of them in hell. Okay, that's the second possibility. And then the other possibility, God decides to save some and he damns some. So now, would God be good if he created everybody in Jannah? Everyone will say, yeah, of course God will be good. Why? Because you see, we are involved in it. We are thinking, what does the human being think about God? That's what makes God good. We are thinking, if God gives us goodness, then God is good. So we think that it is by our judgment that God is good, but whereas God is good irrespective of if we exist or not. So the same way God will be justified. And that's why I will prefer using justified. It's not about good. Good is very human-centric concept. The way we understand good is very anthropocentric. That is it going to benefit us or not? Like when you're walking now on the road, when you want to talk about evil, you will not talk about the bacteria that is dead. You want to talk about human beings, or some people will extend it to animals that are conscious. But there are a lot of things that the smaller you are, the more insignificant. Anyway, we're not even going to go there. The point is this: if God is good in the first scenario where everyone is in Jannah, in paradise, in bliss, no suffering, and then the second scenario, God put everyone in hellfire, he created them there, why would God then not be good? You see, because now in the second scenario where we are in hellfire, we are suffering, and we are suffering, so therefore God cannot be good because he's making us suffer. So it seems to be that our definition of God's goodness is based on what he does. So God is good by virtue of what he does. This is not Islam. In Islam, it is God that creates all things. So When God tells you that He will make you suffer and He will give you goodness in life, you cannot then say when God is giving you good, then God is good. But when the bad things come, it's not from God. This is how dualists come. The dualists, they say there's a God of good and there's a God of evil. In Islam, we are monotheists. We don't have two gods. Everything that happens is by God's will. Do you understand that? Therefore, both the good and the evil is from God. God created all of them. Do you see? So therefore, if God is, we have to now see, you see that principle I just told you? God is not good or evil by virtue of what He does. The first thing it eliminates is that, there's one analogy some people give. They said, if God creates a blue colored ball, does God become colored? No. And Imam al-Juwayni, or the position of the Asharis, I think, but Imam al-Juwayni to be specific, he said that things don't have value in and of themselves. So something cannot be good in and of itself. Like murder. Murder cannot be evil in and of itself because it depends on the context. So if you kill someone, it can be good and it can be bad. It depends on the context. So who is going to decide which context is good or bad? He says it's God. It's whatever God says. Whatever God decides that is good, and that will be what is good. So murder is wrong, for instance. Killing people is wrong. But in self-defense is okay, right? Or in other contexts is okay. So it's not the action itself that is evil. There's some kind of judgment that has to come from either human being or it has to come from God. If it comes from human being, that judgment will be subjective. So from the point of view of the one that is suffering the pain, you will say this is evil. From the point of view of the guy that is doing the opposite, he will say it's good, or he say I don't care. The point is that, remember this, God is not good by virtue of what He does. God is not evil by virtue of what He does. So just because God creates all the things, both good and evil, so a child somewhere now suffering, dying of starvation, who is the one creating this? Who is the one creating it, or who is the one that created this? It's God. It's God that created it. And a child that just ate his breakfast and is eating and is happy, who created it? Is God. So if both of them go to God, if you want to say, if you want to be consistent, you have to say, what we mean by good is when we are in pleasure, when we are enjoying. That's what we mean by good. When it turns opposite, we don't see that as good. We see that as evil. So that is why we need to say, when we say God is good, it's not only because He's giving us good things that we will say God is good. We will say, the best way to say this is to say that God is good irrespective. And this goodness, to me, God's goodness should just be whatever God wills. Because God can literally do whatever He wants. Do you understand that? We cannot judge God. God is our foundation. And this is why I like the Asharis. They are very blunt in saying this. Because if you want to go on the line of saying God is good because of the good things that He does or some things like that, you are going to end up creating another God that will be doing the evil, that will be creating the evil. I think the Mu'tazila, they did something like that. They tried to say, you see, God is not the one that creates. God gave us free will. So we are the ones that do the evil. We are not the one that, so we can create. So they gave creative power to human beings. And it's on that, on their own level. They have not even, what's it called, bringing to bear natural evil, like natural disasters. So is it because the natural disaster is free, that's why natural disasters happen? No. They didn't bring that. They were just focused on even human being, and they gave human beings power in order to avoid God being the one that creates it. Do you see? So to me, the most consistent way, as a monotheist, as a Muslim even, because you will see it, what's this verse that talks about? Well, wait, let me try and remember. من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأولاد والأنفس والثمرات فبشر الصابرين. That God talks about that is the one that creates loss of life, property, and everything like that, all this suffering. But God is using it to test us, right? But the real issue is not about is God trying to test us? Yes. Me, I'm talking about before God created us in the beginning, and even after after the day of judgment, when some people will be sent into hell and some people will be sent into heaven, would God still be good if people are in hell? Some people, they will say no, God will save them eventually. That's how some people will eventually say that everyone will be saved. No one will remain in hell. Because if you say some people will still remain in hell, you still have to answer the question. Those people now, would God be good to them? No. To them, will God be good? But on that day, you will see like God's goodness cannot be based on what He does, because God is going to punish some people. And when you are being punished, you cannot think good of the person that is punishing you. Do you see? That's what we know from human experience. And that's why the position of tafwid is the best way. That God's goodness is transcendent. And God cannot be judged because He's our foundation. To judge your foundation is to refute your ground, and you cannot stand on it anymore. So ultimately, everything has to go to God's will. This is what people call arbitrary. They call it arbitrary will because it's unfathomable to us, because we are part of God's creation. We are not what's it called? We are also subject to God's will. So we are not like God that is not subject to anything. So we cannot make that judgment on God in that sense. And God can do whatever He wants, literally. do you understand? Some people cannot understand this, but I feel like it's a very important concept to understand. And how does this now solve the problem of evil? It solves it in the sense that evil is only from our own perspective. Okay? It's from our own idea of concept of suffering. And if this kind of judgment cannot apply to God, because God is not subject to it necessarily. If you say God is good, and you mean because of good, what He does that is good, you still don't get it yet. You still don't get it yet. You have to say God transcends what we mean by good and evil. Because God does both of them. He creates both of them. From our own experience, He creates both of them. But God is not responsible for. He doesn't acquire. You know the concept of kasb, that human beings acquire those good, whether it's good or evil, we acquire them, right? Kasb. But God does not acquire good by virtue of doing good. Or God does not acquire evil by virtue of creating, when I say do even, it's wrong. By virtue of creating good or by virtue of creating evil. God does not acquire those things because God is immutable and God is transcendent. So therefore, this is the only way you can avoid this. I'm telling you. Else, you're going to try to avoid it, but you then create other problems. Anyway, what do you guys think about this in the comment section? Let me see what you think. See you guys later. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.